So I'll just kind of start by giving you guys a brief overview of how this parent orientation is going to go. And then we'll jump into our opening and go from there. So first things first, my name is Liam Magstead. I'm the new Director of Children, Youth, and Family Ministries at St. Anthony Park UCC. I grew up at St. Anthony Park UCC and spent 16 years of my life going pretty regularly, and then went off to college at Macalester College, graduated at the end of 2019, and did a number of things, including freelance tutoring, working on a small therapy business, and now this position as of the middle of August. So I have taught an OWL cohort once before as one of the co-facilitators of St. Anthony Park's last OWL cohort from 2019 to 2020. And so I'm quite excited to be leading this cohort again. I think it's going to be a great group. So generally today we're going to go through, do introductions. Everybody will get a chance to introduce themselves. I'll do an opening prayer and opening meditation. I just have a poem, a couple of short quotes to read to kind of put us all in a bit of a reflective state of mind. We're going to be asking all of you to share quite a bit about your life, your journeys, and why are you interested in participating in this program? Because it really who have signed up and who have to go through the program. But sex education happens at home first and foremost. And so no matter what, the parents are going to be part of this team. And so it's very much the whole family being involved in doing this process. Cool. Well, I think I'm going to start with this opening meditation, and then I'll let some other folks introduce themselves here. So I have this book. It's from Outward Bound, actually. I got it at the Voyager Outward Bound School up on the edge of the Boundary Waters in northern Minnesota after doing a 8-day dog sledding trip in January. It was one of the coldest experiences of my life and an absolute blast. And so I like taking this quote whenever I'm going into the Boundary Waters, whenever I'm going on camping trips, because it covers a number of different areas of inspiration. So here's a Mary Oliver poem called Wild Geese. Wild geese, you do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about your despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. And one more from John Muir. When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it is hitched to everything else in the universe. So, kind of bearing that sort of reflective awe of the world in mind, let's jump in here. So I'm now going to turn it over to my partner and co-facilitator, Lily Perkel.
Hi, I'm Lily. I will be the other co-facilitator for OWL this year. My sex education experience is a little less conventional than Liam's is. I attended George Washington University, and I was part of a program there where I studied abroad for 2 semesters and a summer internship abroad. This program required us to pick a global issue while we were studying overseas. And my issue was actually access to contraception and sex education. So I studied sex ed curriculums in the Netherlands, China, and the United States, and ended up sort of comparing and contrasting them as a capstone project. I am not a member of any of the congregations present here today. I'm actually Jewish. I was raised in Madison, Wisconsin, and was part of a congregation there for my whole life until moving away. I think that's about everything. Liam will let me know if I missed anything in the introduction.
No, I think that basically covers it. Any other quick questions for Lily before we move on to other Lily? Lovely. Okay. Lily Gordon, would you like to give a hello and a brief introduction as to why you're here?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, I'm Lily Gordon. I'm a sophomore at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities in the nursing program. I've attended the SAP UCC since I was in 3rd grade, and I also did some childcare work there in high school. And yeah, I'm here to tell you a little bit of what the value of OWL has been for me, because I was a part of an OWL cohort in, I think it would have been 7th and 8th grade. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for being here, Lily. She's kind of our guest star for the day here. But before we get into talking about the overview of the curriculum and doing kind of a sample workshop together, I'd like to give Lily Gordon about 5 to 10 minutes to talk a bit about her experience with OWL. I might ask her a couple questions here just to draw out more of the story. And then we'll flop over to Lily Perkel to give a bit of an overview of what sex education looks like in public schools in the United States. So without further ado, Lily Gordon, everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess when you ask like what is the value of OWL been for you, it was hard to know where to start. Like I feel like I gained so much from the program. And I think the main thing is just I'm able to think and talk about almost, you know, any part of sexuality without shame or embarrassment. Yeah, just growing up in a household that, you know, ideas about sex were never shamed, or I never felt like I was being, you know, silenced in any respect. But you know, just hearing what you guys have said, like it's hard for parents to talk to their kids about sex, especially at you know, the middle school age when kids are kind of, you know, starting their journey into adolescence. Like it can be a really awkward thing. So just having that safe space away from my family with peers who I trusted was incredibly valuable for me. And I remember I had a lot of embarrassment and fear around sex. And when Liam's OWL cohort presented to the church, I remember just absolutely hiding my face in my hands and just being absolutely mortified when my dad told me that I would have to do the same thing after the service. I was like, no way, I'm not doing that. Like I get the hesitation. I was right there. But yeah, after just the first meeting, I remember coming home like so excited to learn and just so empowered by the environment that OWL provided for us. It was a really wonderful thing just to be able to be really open and talk about these taboo topics that I've, you know, been told like I shouldn't be embarrassed about, but here I really felt it like, okay, this is okay. I can explore this aspect of ourselves. So yeah, I think coming from a public high school that was generally tried to be progressive, but still, you know, our sex ed program was very lacking in many, many ways, which I'm sure Lily Perkle is going to talk about some of the ways high school sex ed is lacking. But none of that class really was memorable to me. I know they talked about using protection during sex, but they never had us demonstrate it. They never really went into details about different aspects of identity or healthy relationships or many of the other things that OWL covers. So yeah, just I'm really glad that now I have this more positive mindset about sexuality and this vocabulary to talk about different topics. And yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. It's great that you're providing your kids with this opportunity to have this space to learn about themselves and each other. And yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Lily. I have one other question for you here. Do you have like a specific lesson or workshop or activity that you guys did that really sticks with you or jumps out?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the thing that really sticks out to me is I don't know if it's the same now, but we had a retreat for our first couple lessons. Is that still happening? Yeah. So I think the first kind of day of learning where we were all like nervous and uncomfortable, and then just kind of watching that tension kind of unwind. And I think that was really wonderful. And yeah, other lessons that come to mind, I think there was one talking about assertiveness in yourself that was helpful to me. And I really like the healthy relationships workshop as well. But yeah, there wasn't ever a workshop that I didn't feel was helpful. Like, I think everything was important, and I learned a lot from every OWL workshop I attended.
Awesome. Cool. Well, you did a great job selling it there, Lily.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Cool. Anybody have any questions for Lily before we let her go? And so now I'm going to turn it over to Lily Perkle. She is going to talk a bit about sex education in public schools.
Hi. So as I mentioned previously, I did a lot of research on this in college. And one of the sources that I used was, I need screen sharing enabled. I'm not sure if, are you in charge of that, Liam? Or is Victoria in charge of that? I don't know who has control over this. But I'm going to share one of the sources that I use pretty frequently. It is actually a reproductive health policy research institute. They're called the Guttmacher Institute, possibly the Guttmacher Institute. I'm not sure. But they do a lot of really good work around reproductive health policy generally. The page that I'm going to be showing you is state laws and policies on sex and HIV education. So it is updated, valid as of September 1st, 2021. So they actually do a really great job of keeping this page updated and doing it relatively frequently. So everyone should be able to see my screen now. Good? Wonderful. So this is the Guttmacher Institute website. I'm going to be scrolling down to their general requirements. So you can see in this table, it has the general requirements for sex and HIV education, and it shows where sex education is mandated, HIV education is mandated, and then when provided, whether or not the education must be medically accurate, be age appropriate, be culturally appropriate and unbiased, must not promote religion, and then must, in terms of the parental role, either provide notice, consent, or the ability to opt out. So if there is not a check mark, that does not mean that it is necessarily medically inaccurate or that it is necessarily culturally biased. It just means that there is no legislation around that. So you can't guarantee what you're getting. So obviously we're teaching this in Minnesota, so I'm going to scroll down to Minnesota. So here in Minnesota, you can see that sex and HIV education is mandated, but there is no other mandates. So there's nothing about the parents' role. I don't think I can get both of these on the screen at the same time, unfortunately. But there's nothing about the parents' role for notice, consent, or opting out. And there's nothing about it being medically accurate, age appropriate, or any of the other things. Again, this doesn't necessarily mean that it's not. It just means that there is no guarantee whatsoever.
I had a question.
Yeah.
Since opt-out is not checked, does that mean that parents do not have the option to opt out?
I'm honestly not sure. My assumption is that it just means that there is no legislation around that. So my assumption is that it's something that either your school district or your individual school then chooses.
Okay.
Yeah, it's I can jump in here. It's not that parents are unable to opt out. So like my school did give parents the opportunity to choose not to participate, but they don't have to be given that option.
Yep, exactly. So the next table has content requirements. So we know that Minnesota requires that you provide sex and HIV education. And so if this is where it would show if there were any content requirements, such as requiring to cover contraception, requiring to either stress or cover abstinence, requiring when provided doesn't have to include the importance of sex only within marriage, an inclusive or even negative view of sexual orientation, whether or not it has to include negative outcomes of teen sex, and then when provided, whether or not HIV education must provide information on condoms and abstinence. So again, scrolling down to Minnesota, you'll see that there is actually no legislation on this. So Minnesota, it does not require that you mention contraception. It does not require that you mention abstinence. It does not require that you mention the importance of sex only within marriage. It does not require that you mention sexual orientation or the negative outcomes of teen sex. When you have HIV education, which again, we know Minnesota mandates, you must, I believe it is cover. Yeah, you must cover abstinence in terms of HIV education. But again, there's just generally a lack of legislation here in Minnesota. And finally, sex education, whether or not sex education must include life skills, whether or not on sexual consent, relationships, and the prevention of violence. So this shows whether the state must mention healthy relationships, sexual decision-making and self-discipline, refusal skills and personal boundaries, consent, and then dating and sexual violence prevention. And you'll actually see that Minnesota isn't even on this list. So they have no legislation whatsoever about any of these things being included or provided within the state. So I highly recommend that you explore this in your own time. I can share the link. We've also got a little bit of time for questions if anybody wants to look at any other states, or you may have noticed there are some fun little asterisks and other symbols that show sometimes interesting and sometimes terrifying laws about other states' sex education programs. Are there any questions at this time?
My mind is blown.
Yes.
Like I thought we were so progressive, but man.
And
that's
again, so yeah, again, it's not to say that you don't necessarily have these, but it all depends on the school and the school district and the teacher who is teaching it and what they believe is important and relevant. Yeah, so Liam will then talk a little bit about how the OWL program seeks to have a much more inclusive and well-rounded education.
On the other hand, at least Minnesota does not require that they only teach abstinence in sex education.
Yes, there are definitely some upsides.
Yes. So Minnesota is very much a state where this is bitterly debated in the state legislature. We don't have a strong consensus on what direction we're going to go. And so rather than having something legislated, we just don't have anything, right? And so in that sense, we get in areas where sex education, accurate information is not a priority for the community. They could just go with a purely biblical curriculum. You know, you could literally cover HIV exists, and then everything else you're going to get is just Bible passages or just some cartoons, right? It could be anything. Versus in schools in other locations, they could have very high quality sex ed.
Yeah.
But yeah, Lily, do you want to highlight those other
Yeah.
symbols?
So you can see, so Utah also prohibits teachers from responding to students' spontaneous questions in ways that might conflict with the law's requirements. So if you are talking about abstinence and a student asks a question that might contradict what your curriculum says, you are not allowed to answer that question truthfully. In Tennessee, sex education is required in a county if the pregnancy rate is at least 19.5 or higher per 1,000 women aged 15 to 17. Mississippi says that localities may include topics such as contraception or STIs, but they have to have the permission of the State Department of Education. And there's one more interesting one. Oh, yes. And Oklahoma requires that HIV education teaches that, among other behaviors, homosexual activity is considered to be responsible for contact with the AIDS virus. It is 2021 and this is still required in Oklahoma. So we're all really quite grateful that you are either considering or have enrolled your students in this program, because we're generally pretty passionate about comprehensive sex and sexuality education, and we want better for the next generation than this.
Yes, we do.
So if there are no other questions, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. We'll send out this link in whatever our follow-up email is so that you can look at it in your own time if you'd like.
Yep. Fantastic. All right. Any last minute questions for Lily here? Cool. The next thing I would like to move into here is just throwing up a graphic. Vic, I'm not sure if I'm a co-host. I am. Okay. So I would like to share my screen here. It's called, the graph I'm going to show is called the Circles of Sexuality. And this is one of the core elements of the OWL program. So can everybody see this handout? Just give me a thumbs up here if you can see it. Awesome, cool. So there are 5 circles of sexuality according to this graphic, and each one plays a different role in the OWL mentality. Let me see if I can get this whole thing to be on the screen at once. Close enough. So I'm just gonna kind of go around this circle here, starting with the top, which is sensuality. So this is specifically an awareness of bodies. It is about physical touch. It is about being aware of your own body, about the psychology of touch, the enjoyment of being physically close to someone. And this is not necessarily sexual or sexualized touch. It is simply being close to one another and what that sense is like. So that's sensuality. Intimacy is the next one. The ability and need to experience emotional closeness to another human being and to have it returned. So first is senses, second is closeness or intimacy, third is sexual identity. So the development of a sense of who one is sexually, including a sense of, this is saying maleness or and femaleness. This is a slightly older handout. So we would just say what features or what elements of an identity is important to who you are and who you want to be. Next is sexual health and reproduction. So this is a lot of like the plumbing, a lot of the bits and pieces that some folks highlighted in the last unit we were talking about, where it's attitudes and behaviors related to producing children, care and maintenance of the sex and reproductive organs, and health consequences of sexual behavior. So this is where a lot of the more fact-based elements of the curriculum would fit. And finally, we have sexualization. So the use of sexuality to influence or control or manipulate others. And so this is often a negative thing. This is often somebody or a being sexualized. This would be like cat calls on the street, for example, would probably fall under sexualization. But it could also be, you know, it's not always a negative thing. It could be wanting to be attractive to a partner, right? Or wanting to sexualize a specific experience with a consenting partner. And so we're talking about how all of the things that we cover can fit into one of these categories. So at the very beginning of the lesson, this is one of the very first things that we show, or at the very beginning of the curriculum, this is one of the very first things that we show students. And throughout the rest of the curriculum, almost every single workshop refers back to this graphic. It will be sitting in the corner of the classroom, and if we ever are like, huh, what does this relate to? We'll just kind of double check it. And the piece that's missing here, do y'all see the space right in the very middle of this graphic? There's a blank space there. That's where the OWL curriculum puts values. So the uniting piece of all 5 of these circles of sexuality is the values that we choose to put at the center of our being. And so the OWL curriculum has a few key core values that we do absolutely require people to consider when they're making sexual decisions. But we also have every single cohort has a period of time where the students themselves work on coming up with the values that they want to have at the center of their cohort. So that's how they have a lot of control over exactly how their cohort runs. Like Lily Gordon was mentioning earlier, she never felt like any boundaries were crossed. She didn't feel particularly uncomfortable other than being horribly embarrassed, which is perfectly normal. And part of the reason I think that people are much more comfortable with the OWL curriculum than many others is because there's this element of agency where you get to determine what is core what are the values that we're all going to agree on together. So here are the OWL core values that can then be added to. So the first core value of OWL is self-worth. We believe that everyone inherently has value, and we want to encourage people to recognize that value in themselves. Second is sexual health. As sexual beings, as human beings with physical forms, we need to take care of our bodies and our minds and our souls. And there is an element of just keeping up good health. So next, or sexual health is one that probably has like the most components to it. We spend a lot of time covering sexual health. It's things like making sure that sexual relationships are consensual, non-exploitative, mutually pleasurable, safe from unwanted pregnancy or infections or diseases. They're developmentally appropriate. They're based on mutual expectation and caring, and they include respect. So we would consider all of those elements of sexual health. So self-worth, sexual health. Third is responsibility, so that you have responsibility for taking care of yourself and others that you're in relationship with. And finally, justice and inclusivity. So we want to be aware of historical injustices, injustices that are occurring today, and trying to include everyone that we possibly can in this cohort, in this educational experience. So self-worth, sexual health, responsibility, justice, and inclusivity are the four really key elements of OWL. And they can add whatever else they want. Have fun, be goofy, you know, whatever you want to do. Talk about your pets. We can really have fun with this. What else we value? Okay. In order to make sure that these values are followed and acknowledged, the OWL curriculum provides a bill of rights to the students of the cohort. So we literally will like have a handout where all of the students have everything they are entitled to do handed to them right at the very beginning. And that kind of helps with Unit 1. So Unit 1 of the OWL curriculum, or let me make a clear transition here. So I'm gonna stop presenting here. Does anybody have any questions on the Circles of Sexuality? I can throw that back up if we do that. Ooh, turn off my screen share here. So for the last couple of minutes, I'm just going to give the kind of overview structure of the course that we have mapped out here, and then answer a couple last questions, and I'll let you get on your way. So the OWL curriculum that we are teaching is the 7, 8, and 9 curriculum. It is 25 workshops. Each workshop is about 2 hours. So this is approximately a 50-hour course. We may pull in the 10, 11, 12 curriculum is a bit longer. It talks a little bit more about sexual relationships and sexual decision-making and sexual pleasure. And so depending on how the cohort is doing next spring, we might, and how fast we're moving, we could pull in some of those later elements if everyone is on board for that. But this curriculum is 25 2-hour workshops. We are splitting those 25 workshops into 17 3-hour sessions. So we aren't going to have clean one workshop per one session. We'll try to do about 1.5 per session. We're kicking off with not a full retreat. Lily Gordon mentioned that her cohort started with a retreat. Typically, we'd like to do that to get everybody over that awkward phase as quickly as possible. But instead, we're going to kind of do a part 1, part 2, everything but the lock-in experience at SAP UCC. So on Friday night, October 8th, we're going to have a 4-hour session at the church from 7 to 11 p.m. 2 hours of that are going to be dedicated to the first workshop, and the second 2 hours are just fun and games, having the kids get to know each other a bit better. The next day, we'll do workshop 2 from 10 to 12 in the morning. And so that's how we're going to try to get the feel of a bit of a retreat packed into 2 days. The very next week will be our third workshop. So we're packing those first 3 workshops into the space of about a week and a half, or week and 2 days. So the 25 workshops are split into 7 units. Those units are, the first one is Introduction, which covers what is sexuality. So the circles of sexuality that we all looked at together. And then Values, so putting values right in the middle of those circles. And then the language of sexuality. So this forms all the group norms that the rest of the cohort will rely on. So after that, we move into Unit 2, which is You as a Sexual Being. So covering things like anatomy, physiology, puberty, gender identity, sexual orientation, sexuality and disability. All sorts of elements are in You as a Sexual Being. Unit 3 is Relationships. It's actually a relatively short unit. It covers healthy relationships and relationship skills, which is a lot about communication. Lily Gordon mentioned this one, I believe, as well, when she said it's assertiveness is one of the things that's stressed versus aggressive or passive communication. We want assertive communication. It's very clear. Unit 4 is Contemporary Issues. So this is probably one of the ones that's the most out of date in this curriculum. But this is one where we cover things like social media and bullying. Unit 5 is Responsible Sexual Behavior. Unit 6 is Sexually Transmitted Infections, Pregnancy, and Parenting. And Unit 7 is Communicating About Sexuality. So in this sense, the curriculum really builds. A lot of the traditional sex ed stuff happens in the first unit, 2 units, right? All of the language and anatomy. After that, it's a lot more exploration, a lot more practice, a lot more exhaustive about what we can get into with our time. Okay, questions about that overview here? Anything else? Anything at all? There is going to be a question box. So every OWL cohort has a question box. So you can ask questions anonymously. We will answer them between each session. We'll take the 2 weeks to research it and get back to anyone who's got questions. Fantastic. Okay, that's all I have. I would love to end with just reading one more quick passage here from my Outward Bound book. Unless anybody else has a final question. All right. This is by Virginia Satir. I want to love you without clutching, appreciate you without judging, join you without invading, invite you without demanding, leave you without guilt, criticize you without blaming, and help you without insulting. If I can have the same from you, then we can truly meet each other. Thank you. Have a great weekend, everyone. and I will look forward to talking to you soon.